And second, during the height of the financial crisis, some business people and even some free market economists felt uncertain about opposing the emergency powers claimed by Paulson and Bernanke. One economist told me, if Ben Bernanke has seen all the data and really feels this is necessary, then I'm inclined to believe him. Well, I think that was the wrong attitude, but I understand that some people thought liquidity crisis, credit crunch, these are complicated issues. We can't be sure that we should be marching in the streets, writing the op-ed pieces, opposing this. Well, that's all over now. Smaller government people feel no ambivalence about taking on the Obama-Reid-Pelosi government and its assault on economic freedom across the board. And instead of this financial rescue package, which was sort of complicated, instead of that, we are now facing an old-fashioned Keynesian throw money at the problem, kitchen sink spending attitude. The stimulus bill, the Obama budget, all of that. Free market people, small government people understand these are bad ideas. Most free market economists felt no ambivalence about stepping up to oppose the stimulus bill. John Cochran of the University of Chicago, I thought, had a great line. He said, "The premise of a fiscal stimulus is that Americans do not borrow enough and do not spend enough. The idea is we're going to make people borrow and spend more money." Robert Barrow of Harvard called it probably the worst bill that has been put forward since the 1930s. So that started to get people back in the game. And I think the reaction to the so-called stimulus bill may have been the beginning of the renaissance of the free market movement. Freed from the burden of feeling some connection to a Republican president, Republicans voted overwhelmingly against the bill in both houses of Congress. Libertarians played leading roles in galvanizing the opposition. I hope all of you saw the full-page newspaper ads the Cato Institute ran with 300 economists saying it is not true that there is a consensus of economists in favor of this spending bill. We ran them in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. That ad was talked about on television. It was held up by Republican senators at a press conference. It seemed to energize free marketeers who had felt their voice hadn't been heard in national debates over the past few months. In addition, Americans for Prosperity posted an anti-stimulus petition on the web. Libertarians led tea parties. FreedomWorks is planning a taxpayers' march on Washington for September 12th. All of these things are a sign that the good news is the free market movement is back in gear. The bad news is that's because the welfare state is on the march. That's what it has taken to get our movement back in gear. But we Americans, we freedom-loving Americans, have faced dark days for American freedom before. Think about the first great fight for American freedom, the Revolution. July of 1776 was a wonderful date in human history. Not only did Adam Smith publish The Wealth of Nations in England, but on this side of the Atlantic, Americans declared that they would stand for the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and they would take on the greatest empire in the world in order to defend those rights. And 6 months later, the state of the American Revolution was such that Thomas Paine issued his essay, The Crisis, that began, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." And that was December of 1776. And just a year later, just before Christmas 1777, if you remember your high school history, do you know what was going on? Christmas 1777, Washington's army took up winter quarters at Valley Forge. And they faced a cruel race with time to get crude huts erected before the soldiers, barefoot and half naked, froze to death. Many of their horses actually did starve to death, and for the army, starvation was a real danger. And then came the fight against slavery, an institution that had existed from time immemorial in virtually all parts of the world. until the rise of libertarian ideas in England and America created a movement for abolitionism. And we've all read of the horrors of the Middle Passage and the regime of legalized violence that sustained slavery on the plantation. Reports and novels about the reality of slavery helped to change people's minds. But the fundamental principle that motivated the abolitionists was liberty. If you read the writings and the speeches of Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison and Sarah and Angelina Grimke, that's the theme you see. Angelina Grimke wrote, "The great fundamental principle of abolitionists is that man cannot rightfully hold his fellow man as property. Therefore, we affirm that every slaveholder is a man-stealer. A man is a man, and as a man he has inalienable rights, among which is the right to personal liberty." Liberty and self-ownership, the fundamental principles of American freedom, of Western freedom, that's what made the case against slavery, and eventually, after all those centuries, abolished chattel slavery. And then, compared to the hardships of Valley Forge and plantation slavery, the New Deal may seem like a minor problem, but it did present a fundamental challenge to economic freedom and constitutional government. And in the 1930s, we heard phrases like the market has failed, we were in a crisis atmosphere, we saw pseudo-solutions passed in panic, just like today, and the forerunners and the founders of the libertarian movement reacted in horror. This is really when the libertarian movement began in reaction to the New Deal. Frank Knight, the great Chicago economist, told Hayek, a younger Chicago economist at that time, that the New Deal represented a general movement of West European civilization away from liberalism to authoritarianism. The failure of the project of a society based on freedom and intelligence, the one fairly favorable chance ever seen in history, and the like of which will probably never be seen again. George Stigler, another Chicago economist, said that Henry Simons told him the basic values of civilization would be lost. This is how freedom-loving Americans were responding to the New Deal. It was a scary time. Isabel Patterson, a great writer, said it was not correct to say that the New Deal was like fascism. The New Deal is fascism, she said. And then, after 8 years of the New Deal, unemployment still high, the economy still in the doldrums, came World War. And the great Austrian economist at Harvard, Joseph Schumpeter, said in 1941, talking about the New Deal and what he saw as the likely effects of war, "I cannot help feeling that this will be the end of the American way of life."